Ravin, it's so great to connect today. We share an interest in what I think is one of the most important topics in the world, so I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, likewise, Nate. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
As you think about the future and where we're headed, what lesson would you most want to share with others?
So the thing, Nate, that has consistently come out in the six books I've written about the future of work and the impact of AI on work is is that the individuals, the leaders, and by extension, the organizations who consistently thrive are the ones who refuse to be defined by their legacy, what made them successful before. They're the ones who, in the face of this growing volatility of change, where the velocity of change is accelerated, have the curiosity and the learning agility to keep looking around corners, to keep wanting to reinvent themselves. And again, not be defined by what made them successful before. So it's been really fascinating to see, you know, these individuals kind of transcend, if you will, where they came from.
So, when you think about people who have perpetually reinvented themselves, who do you think of?
So, I think of, I think of business leaders like, Satya Nadella at Microsoft. I think of great chief people officers like Diane Gearson, who used to be at IBM. I actually think of my co-author on my last book, Tanuj Kapilaswamy, who started off as a corporate banker, became the head of HR for one of the oldest banks in the world, and is now the chief strategy and chief talent officer. And it's one of the reasons why we collaborated in on this last book, The Skills Powered Organization, was to really give leaders a roadmap for to what that next generation enterprise looks like and what that design journey actually feels like and is like.
I love this lesson because this hits me kind of hard, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. Maybe not quite in the way that you described it, but I remember when Michael Jordan retired for the first time, and no, or was it the second time? It was probably the second time. Well, maybe both times because some people loved that. Some people loved that he was going out on top. And on one hand, I was like, yeah, that's fine. But on the other hand, if you love basketball, who cares if you're going out on top of the bottom? I would keep playing as long as I can, as long as I love it. And what I think happens is people can be so concerned about their image or how other people are going to remember them that
Mhm.
we can be unwilling or afraid to take risks and either fail or take risks and reinvent ourselves in some new domain where we might fail at first. But if we want to have fun and we want to do it, I think we should care much less about kind of holding on to this past image of ourselves.
Yeah, Ned, I completely agree. So much of this is about a sense of identity, right? As you know. And particularly when we talk about reinvention, it's for so many of us, it's the identity I have is the job that I do, right? Because that's the thing that defines me. And now you're saying, well, actually, you know what? That work is going to change. You're going to need to upskill for the role you're in today because it's going to evolve, or you're going to need to reskill to do something different or adjacent. And it's how do we decouple that sense of identity that what I do is who I am to my journey is one to keep reinventing myself. And the journey is the destination. The job is not that destination, that it's that journey of reinvention that is truly what's core to your identity. Heck of a lot easier said than done, right?
Yeah, I love that mindset though. The journey is to keep reinventing. And if that's our mindset, certainly that's an easier place to start from than I want to go out on top. And so I don't want to risk trying longer, harder, or even something new because I don't want that to either make me feel less about my identity or have others think less of who I am.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right.
Okay, so we've talked on this and maybe directly or at least indirectly. So, what are the biggest hurdles for people when it comes to reinventing themselves?
I think there's a couple that we consistently see. One is the stuff. how do I think beyond the stuff that got me here and actually recognize that the stuff that got me here is not the stuff that will get me to next. I think that's a big part of it. And so much of that is in fact the skills, because the skills that I have, as I said earlier, my curiosity, my learning agility, my recognition that I need to keep developing new and adjacent skills. I need to be passionate, not about necessarily the skills I have, but passionate about learning new and acquiring different skills. I think that's a key part of the journey. I think the other, which we really underestimate in the environment we're in, you know, the world of work used to be always complicated, in going back over the last 140 years. We've gone from complicated to truly complex. And when you move into a truly complex environment, those simple solutions that are largely individually based, right? I'm going to win because I can do this myself. I think those simple solutions give way to a need for systems and more collaborative ecosystems that come together and raise up a lot more people. And I think it's those systems that ultimately win versus an individual who perhaps can navigate a complicated environment, but would never be able to withstand all of these continuously changing forces and to keep navigating through that. So being part of that ecosystem, I think, is critically important. Um, and I think the last thing that is, I alluded to the accelerated velocity of change and the volatility. I think we all need to be really intentional about designing in space for learning and well-being into the flow of work, and stop trying to sort of keep fighting this fight of trying to find work-life balance. Work will always permeate every boundary, every box that it's put in. And I think we need to be much more intentional about, again, designing in that space for learning and well-being into the flow of work itself.
Okay, so as you think about this lesson that you most want to share, how are you personally applying this in your own life?
That's the great question, right? It's so much easier to tell rather than do,
Yeah,
right?
knowing doing gap.
Uh,
There's a huge gap. It's easy to know. It's hard to do.
Indeed. So I've actually, as I've been over the last sort of 18 months or so, just tried to be a lot more intentional about doing just that, ensuring that I'm every day creating some space. It might be an hour here, it might be 2 hours there, um, for both some self-reflection, to both just sit back and to be able to think, because so much of what I do, both in my day job of leading a large transformation consulting business, in the other day job of driving thought leadership, being on the faculty at Caltech, is about innovating and developing new ideas and seeing connections and adjacencies and seeing opportunities to push existing ideas. And that really requires some space and time. And there's only so much space that you can do on an 8-hour flight from Chicago to London, in the middle of the night. But trying to be a bit more intentional, right? And saying, I am going to design in that space for innovation, for self-reflection, and frankly, for a little bit of well-being, to be able to just, release and reset.
So this is maybe a little bit of a tangent or an extension, but as you think about the future, what most scares you, and how can this lesson that you're sharing maybe mitigate some of those fears?
I think probably the thing that most scares me is I'll go back to my earlier point about legacy, right? Relying on legacy mindset, skill set, and tool set to solve problems that fundamentally don't lend themselves to those legacy capabilities. And I think our ability, both at a societal level, at a company level, and individual level, to understand how we pivot our mindset, skill set, and tool set to continue to be fit for purpose, I think is going to be absolutely essential if we're going to navigate this next of work.
How do you think about this for people who are not only 10 or 20, who are just, I know it probably feels easy to kind of reinvent themselves from high school or maybe college. how do you apply this for somebody who's in their 60s or 70s?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that by clients all the time. I think, well, firstly, in the old days, if you were 60 or 70, you'd be retired, right? And today, most 60 or 70-year-olds, either by necessity or by choice, are engaged in some form of work. I think there is a real opportunity to sort of look at how does all of my experience help me sort of anticipate and understand maybe what's coming next. How does the fact that I've navigated all of these changes, prepare me maybe to be a bit more resilient in the face of change, and to try something new? How do I then use that foundation, if you will, to also extend myself? How do I create space to experiment and try new things? Everyone's talking about this chat GPT thing. How do I create space to actually play with it and use it in what I'm doing? And again, I think if we can design in space for that innovation to push the envelope a little bit, to look at adjacencies and connections from one domain to another, I think that becomes incredibly important. Maybe the tolerance for risk taking is maybe a little mitigated as you get older, right? Versus the perhaps folks younger. But I think, forcing ourselves to step outside, right, and reinventing ourselves.
Yeah, I can imagine a 75, 80-year-old version of myself that learns about ChatGPT for the first time and just says, "Oh, I don't care. What, like that's too complicated for me." And the version that's way more interesting and exciting is like, I'm 75, 80, and I hear about ChatGPT and I think, what is this? I want to learn about it. And I've got a lot of experience in my life that maybe will give me some interesting perspective on ChatGPT. So I love the mindset, and I hope that I can adopt that. I hope I have been adopting it, but I hope I can remember this lesson forever to just have this mindset. Maybe last question then, Ravin, is as you think about the future, I mean, you think about the future a lot. What are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic that we as a species and as a community will will keep reinventing ourselves, right? That will continuously see the possibilities as opposed to the negatives. We'll see the opportunities to think about doing something differently. And what I'm hopeful of is that we will bring as many people as possible along, and not, sort of do perhaps what we've unfortunately done for the last 30 years, is to perpetuate these inequality in the world, because these technologies have truly driven inequality. But I do think generative AI has, and much has been written about this, Nate, the potential to actually reduce inequality by raising, all boats. And that's what I'm optimistic about, is we can, bring everyone along on this journey.
This is also a little bit of a tangent, but it just reminded me of that phrase, something like progress in academia happens one death at a time. And I think it's related because, if we have success in one field, in one academic discipline or whatever, it can be tempting for us to just hold on to that, latch on, protect it. And the optimistic version is that we all adopt this mindset of perpetual reinvention, and hopefully we can continue to grow ourselves rather than letting society grow through death and just having the younger generation push people forward each time. Well, any last things you'd like to share, Robin, as we wrap up here?
Just thank you for the opportunity, Nate. I'm so intrigued by the series that you're doing, and just this continuous challenging of every person, whether it's your kids, your students, anyone else listening to this, to step outside their traditional boundaries, to push themselves, to give them the opportunity to sort of just think differently, learn differently, and reinvent themselves. So grateful to be on this show with you.
Thank you, Robin. You nailed it, and you have given us all a lot to think about. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.